I don't do homework in my program. There are a number of reasons for that, but yeah, I don't do homework. For one thing, it's too hard on the families, and for the other thing, it's too hard on me. I don't want to be managing people when they're not there.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Time, the show where we explore the defining moments that made people who they are today and the impact of those moments over time. Here's your host, Luke Tatum. Hello and welcome back to The Price of Time. I'm your host, Luke Tatum. Today's guest is Katy Barrett. Katy is a homeschooling mom and the owner of Immersion Learning Collaborative, a program for homeschooled students. She's also the former owner of the Little Strathmore Schoolhouse, which is a home-based nursery school. Katy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm glad we could make this work. I apologize for all the hecticness on my end, getting this to work out. Life's been a wild ride lately, but really excited we're getting a chance to talk and kind of get into the details. So as we always do on the show, I'm going to ask you to kind of tell me what we're going to talk about today. I have an idea, but give me the 1-2 minute version of kind of what this defining moment in your life was, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. So I was a public school teacher. I have a master's degree in education. I worked in the public sector for probably about a decade, and I was home on maternity leave with my second child. And I turned on the TV and I found out that the job that I had, the program that I was running, it was a grant-funded program, funded at the federal level, and the funding had been eliminated. So I found out from the television that my job, that I was home on maternity leave, that I didn't have a job to go back to. I did have a couple months to go back to it because we were funded through the end of the grant cycle. But I, after those few months, that I wasn't going to have a job anymore. And so I began to stay home with my kids, do some childcare. I ended up deciding to open a nursery school. Then I decided to homeschool my kids, and I ran my nursery school for about 8 years, and then took a couple years off, which also coincided with the COVID years, and then ended up opening another program for older homeschool kids, which my children, 2 of my 3 children attended. My 2 older are now in public school for high school, and I still have my younger at home, and my youngest, and he comes with me to the program.
Gotcha. Well, so my first question that immediately comes to mind is, when did they actually tell you officially that you didn't have a job? Because that's a kind of a wild thing.
Yeah, I think all of us found out from the television, including my boss. So this was kind of in the day before group chat. So I think we were all frantically emailing each other on group threads. And we had all found out because the financing was eliminated on a federal level in some sort of congressional budget debate. And so we were all scrambling. And then they had enough money to run like 1 or 2 programs for an additional year. So for a while, there was like a hope that maybe we'd be one of them. And we were reaching out to politicians and doing all sorts of stuff, but that didn't come to be.
Gosh, that is crazy. So were you it sounds like you were just kind of wheeling from that. You're like,
right.
Oh my gosh, what is going on? What am I going to do? That kind of thing. So from there, I mean, I know you kind of shifted gears and all those things, and it ended up working out, but how long were you kind of in the chaos of that?
I was very shocked when it first happened, and primarily because we had made it through the Bush years with our funding intact, and everybody felt like if anybody was going to cut the funding, it was going to be George Bush. So once we had Obama in office, everyone thought, we're not going to get our funding cut. So that it was definitely a shock. I knew almost immediately that I would figure out how to stay home with my kids. I worked part-time. It was a part-time position, about 20 hours a week. And I just knew immediately that I just had my second baby, and I was going to end up figuring out a way to stay home with my kids. So it was honestly, I think I found out in March, and then I went back in April. And then the funding ended in August. I didn't miss a beat. I had a plan. I had advertised for childcare clients on, this was back in the days of Craigslist. And so my last day was a Friday, and I started doing childcare in my home on Monday. I didn't even get a day off.
You sound like me. I mean, that's been all of my career transitions and things my whole life. It's been like, okay, well, that job's over, time to start, and just walk right into the next thing. Um, and that part of that was finances, living paycheck to paycheck kind of a thing. But honestly, it's just like I don't know what to do with myself really whenever I don't have work to do. I suspect that we're very similar in that respect, But um, so, what was your life like though before this happened? Because obviously that was a big surprise, right? So had you been doing this in this kind of federally funded program for a number of years, and it's just like you expected to?
I had been doing it for a few years. Prior to that, I was a classroom teacher. Now, as a classroom teacher, um, I I wasn't a huge fan of a number of things about public education, especially because I worked in the early childhood sector, and everybody who worked in the early childhood sector was aware that the changes that were coming from a top-down approach to education were not developmentally appropriate. And that they actively taught us in my undergrad and my graduate school programs how to code switch so that you could speak the jargon that the administrators needed to hear to write down on their little paperwork, and then you would shift gears behind closed doors and teach in a way that was developmentally appropriate for children. So it was no big secret. They openly told us, they're not running classrooms the way they ought to be running classrooms, and it's your job to protect the kids from the way they want you to run the classroom, but also to speak the language so that they'll get off your back and leave you alone and you can teach. So there were a number of things I wasn't crazy about with public education, and I always gravitated towards things like experimental classroom approaches, new grants that were out there, thinking outside of the box. So the program that I was running at the time that I got laid off was it was called a family literacy program, and it was primarily for parents who had children young and then they weren't able to finish high school. So we had 4 components to that. We had a GED class. You could bring your children, and they had an early childhood class. Then we had a parenting class that I taught, even though I didn't have kids yet when I started teaching it. And then we had a parent and child together time where the parents came into the classroom, and we taught them like different activities they could do at home, low cost ways to take books from the library and elaborate on them to make projects for your kids, how to make learning fun, essentially. And I loved that job. That was a ton of fun. I loved working with the parents, loved working with the kids. So I already knew that I wanted to do things a little bit differently than I could in public education. And then when I got the chance to stay home with the kids and babysit, I had a lot less money, but I had a tremendous amount of freedom, and I could do whatever I wanted with these kids. And I babysat 2 little children who were the same age as my kids. So we just had a ton of fun, and I loved the work. I loved being with the kids, but the working conditions of doing childcare are really, really hard. You are working like 10-hour days. You don't have a lunch. You don't have breaks. You don't have another adult to help you ever. And, you have to start at 7 in the morning and you don't finish until 5 in the afternoon. Those were my hours. You can kind of set your own hours, but they tend to be very long hours. And it was really, really tiring. And you have to your house has to be clean all the time because you're running a business out of your house. So the kids would be sleeping and I'd be frantically like mopping the floors and trying to keep the house up. And the working conditions were very exhausting. So after a year of that, that's when I decided that I wanted to open a nursery school. Nursery school in New York is defined as being less than 3 hours a day. So I could take more kids, more clients, but I had a much shorter day. And so then 1 year of childcare led me into the nursery school approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, childcare is no joke. And there's, a lot of things to it. And of course, there's regulatory issues, as you're kind of alluding to. And 3 hours a day, I mean, gosh, that's a lot of information for somebody to take in. So we homeschool. And I mean, I don't think that we typically have education for more than like 3 hours a day, I mean, because it's like you can kind of touch the bases that you need to touch and you have active, engaged learning for a limited window of time. And then it's like, okay, cool, we're done. We can do something else. And of course, I was not homeschooled. I was for a very brief period, but I don't even remember that. I was in public education, and it's like this never ending kind of slog through all this material. I was always starving, and just like not a good experience. I don't want to sit here and harp on that. But um, so I'm very interested, that you've kind of seen this from multiple angles and you've had a chance to take a step back and reassess and kind of say, well, maybe this is a little bit better approach, right? And I appreciate that you mentioned always being willing to look at alternative approaches to teaching and some of those things, right? Was this Common Core when you were talking about I know I'm switching gears here, but was that Common Core that was coming in or something else?
No, this was back in the days of No Child Left Behind. And with No Child Left Behind, what exploded there was the use of standardized testing as a measurement of how well the schools were doing. So I live in a city that has a very high rate of generational poverty. And so you see a correlation there with low test scores. So the schools around here were constantly under the threat of being closed. Which I observed happen a couple times. And that was funny because they close them and then they just reopen them with a different name. A lot of times, same staff, same administration, same building, same clients, same kids that are coming. So that was entertaining to see. But yeah, that was in the Common Core. That was pre-Common Core. It was in the No Child Left Behind days.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have my timeline nailed down. That's why I asked. So, and I kind of missed out on that in my own education. I'm 34, about to be 35. And so, we had No Child Left Behind type programs in place, obviously standardized testing when I was in school. But the Common Core stuff, even I look back at some of those materials. I'm like, what are they doing? What are they teaching? So there's always something. There's always some big looming thing. Now, I'm interested in kind of your I'm going to call it post-awakening. Okay. That's not really the right term, but your defining moment here, you're losing of your job, you're kind of redefining what you're going to be doing to interact with kids. And obviously you're very passionate about education and all that. So starting some of these programs of your own and getting to get in there, kind of like boots on the ground, I guess is the term I'll use. Are there things that you started to notice like over time, like maybe we should tweak things? Have you had a lot of big shifts in education since you've been doing these types of things?
I would say that the core of my philosophy has remained pretty stable. And the core of my philosophy is simply that learning does not need to be boring. Learning is fun. There are pieces that are going to be boring sometimes. There are things that if you want a goal, you may have to persevere through details to get to your goal that you're not crazy about. But on the whole, it shouldn't be that laborious slog that you're referring to there. My experiences in school I did really well in school. I usually got A's and B's on everything from kindergarten pretty much up through 12th grade. But my experiences with school were that the work was very easy and that I just had to memorize and regurgitate. And then I got a lot of praise for memorization and regurgitation. I got A's and I got honors and everybody told me how smart I was, but I was an avid reader outside of school. I just devoured books. Anybody that knew me as a child would say that I was just constantly had my head in a book. And so I was experiencing these deeper connections with the things that I was reading where I cared about them and they were fascinating to me. And then when I would get praise at school for memorizing and regurgitating things that I did not care about at all, it made me very contemptuous of the system, not necessarily contemptuous of the people themselves, because I generally got along okay with my teachers and stuff, but contemptuous of the system that was telling me that this was valuable when I could clearly see that it was not valuable. And I think that's been tempered a little bit as I age. I still have a little bit of that chip on my shoulder, but the core of my philosophy that learning should be fun has remained the same. One of the things that I saw when I ran my nursery school, one of the things that I loved when I ran my nursery school was the lack of bureaucracy. Because if you want to make a change in a public education setting, or even in some of these smaller grant settings, you're going to have to define the problem, come up with solutions, go to 7 billion in 12 meetings, present your findings, find funding, fill out 75 realms of paperwork. I mean, it's just so laborious to make a change. And I remember that there was one year, for the most part, I ran my nursery school by myself, but I had a baby. I had my third child, the first year that I opened it. And so when I was going to go back the second year, I was like, I need more help than this. I can't do this by myself. So one of my clients who had two children coming to me had also just given birth to her third. And she had an early childhood background as well. So she joined me, and together we ran this program for the 1 year that we both had babies. So I took extra kids so I could afford to pay her and we could make that work. And in my backyard, there's a hill. And at the bottom of the hill is a flat area where the kids' swing set is. And the first couple years I ran the business, I let the kids, there was a slide that led down to the swing set, and I let them both slide down it to get to the swing set and also roll trucks down it. And if you only have 6 or 8 kids, that worked out fine. But when we had 12 kids, they were rolling trucks down the slide at the same time that other kids are down there by the swing set. And the very first day, my colleague and I looked at each other and we were like, this is not going to work. With the numbers we have, this is not going to work. And so the morning ended and the kids left, and I started to think about how to make it work. And I realized that I had another hill on the other side of my yard that really led nowhere. It was just a hill and it was kind of useless space. And I thought, if I yank up that slide, I had a plastic slide kind of like embedded in the ground, but more like it was just sitting on top of the ground. Said, if I can yank up this slide and I can move it across here, and then I can zip tie a bin of trucks to the fence over there, we can still let the kids roll the trucks down the hill, which they love to do, but it will not be running into the kids who are trying to get on the swings, and it'll be less likely to lead to a dangerous situation. And so that day, I yanked up the slide and I carried it over and I put it in a new spot and I zip tied a bin and I moved all the trucks. And the next day when the kids came back, it was done and the problem was solved. And that was a really big eye-opening moment for me, because it was like, I have the power to solve these problems instantly. If I have an idea, I can implement it instantly, and I can make these changes so fast. Whereas this would take me tons of meetings and paperwork and discussions and permissions and all of the stuff. If I still worked in public ed, this would take months to get approved. Months. It could take a whole year to get approved. And I could do it right then. So that was a really big eye-opening moment for me. In terms of seeing the differences. One of the other things that's been interesting that I think is shifting for me now is that I used to think that this play-based learning was the end-all be-all. It's my favorite way to teach. It's probably one of my favorite ways to learn. And there's a lot of philosophy behind it. There's a lot of educational philosophers who discuss it. And I was sold on it 100%. And one of the things that's been very interesting for me to observe now that I work with older kids, middle school kids, is that there are some kids who really like the type of learning that they do in schools. They like to sit and read and answer questions. And I don't think that it makes them wrong. I don't think it makes them an NPC or it makes them a bad kid or anything along those lines. I think the key, rather than thinking that the key is that it has to be play-based learning, I'm coming to move towards thinking the key is choice, that the child gets to choose, because there can be a child who's highly motivated to do very traditional type of learning, but they have the choice. They have the choice to do that. And when they choose to do it, it works really, really well for them. So that has been a little bit of a shift. Instead of thinking like, oh, everybody should be running these play-based classrooms, now I think we should be running a variety of types of classrooms, depending on the gifts of the teachers and what they want to offer. And then the kids should have the freedom to choose what teachers they connect with, what types of classes they connect with, what subjects they connect with, and piece together, whatever you want to call it, an entire education or however you want to think about it, piece together a whole from the sum of these parts where the children have a lot of choice. To some degree, kind of like college and choosing a major.
Right. I think traditionally people would think that a child does not have enough, wherewithal to choose, to be able to choose what is going to be effective, right? And am with you. I mean, I think that's not correct. I think that they do have, they're going to be motivated to learn certain things, and they're not going to necessarily learn them in the order that you would want to teach them. Or, they may excel in a certain area, and like my son is really into math. He likes doing math questions in a very like traditional style way. He likes to answer a math question. And that's awesome. And I would have never expected that. But he does, and it's cool that we know that because we have so much one-on-one time. And so, I'm curious about two things though. You mentioned kind of a play-based learning approach, and I have to admit I don't know really exactly what you're, getting at when you say that. So I want to know more about what that is for the viewers and for myself. But then also this this implementation of a choice-based system, how you're maybe achieving that or working to achieve that. I'm very, very fascinated by both of those things. So maybe tell me about play-based learning first, if you would.
Play-based learning is an approach from early childhood education where they looked at the data about how children learn, and they found that children learn through play a lot faster and more efficiently. I don't remember the exact stats right now, but they looked at how many repetitions it takes for a child to remember or to master facts, skills, that sort of thing. And the number of repetitions it takes when they're actively engaged in play was way lower than the number of repetitions that it takes from other types of learning. I think if you've ever watched small children, you can see that they learn through play. They're wired for play. They automatically, you take them to a playground and they see a whole bunch of strangers and they automatically come together and start playing. It happens very, very organically. I try to bring that approach up a little bit with my older kids and have options and choices where play is a part of how we learn in our classroom now. Last year, I had a 3rd through 6th grade classroom. This year, I have a 4th through 7th grade classroom. My group's just kind of aging up. And so one of the ways that I bring choice-based options into my classroom is with centers or stations. And they do this in public school too. But mine were specifically chosen and designed based on the interests of the kids and trying to really bring in a variety of types of learning styles. So one example that I can give is that we studied geography in my homeschool program. And last year we studied Asia. So we would be studying a certain country and we would watch some videos about it, maybe read an excerpt from a book about it, have a morning meeting where we talk about what is your familiarity with this country and this culture? What do you already know about it? What are you curious about? What would you like to do? What would you like to know? And I observed different things that my group liked to do. And we have a block center. The church where we rent space used to be a nursery school, and they had a huge shelf full of wooden blocks. Now, I love blocks. I love block play. I think it's a great thing for kids, great for engineering, great for math, great for science, great for creative, imaginative play. So we would pull up on a computer images of architecture from the different places that we were studying. And the kids could look through the images of architecture, read about the different things that they were looking at or watch videos about it, and then decide if they wanted to recreate something that they saw. And then they would use the blocks to recreate that. So that would be one center, would be block play. And I had 4th grade boys that would do block play for like 75 minutes straight. They remade the Taj Mahal. They did such cool stuff there. So that would be one center. I would, at the same time, have another center in another area of the classroom where we made homemade Play-Doh with the kids. And then they were researching food from the region that we were studying. And so they were watching, sometimes teachers would pull up like TikToks of people that were visiting the places and trying the food. We could watch. There are videos of kids that travel with their families and then make YouTube videos about the food that they saw in different places. So restaurant menus, all sorts of stuff. So they could find out more about the food, and then they would create menus from those countries and make the food out of Play-Doh, remake the food out of Play-Doh, and then tell us. First they would just make it, and then I started to try and build on it. Like, okay, now I want you to make sure that you write down the name of this dish and learn how to say it. Now I want you to find out a recipe for this dish. Now I want you to find out a list of ingredients, so kind of scaffolding that up so that it's getting more complex as they go. And then at the same time, we would have, I've got like two adjoined classrooms that connect. So in the smaller of the two classrooms, we call it the quiet room, because it has quieter stuff for when the kid, if they get too overwhelmed with the blocks and the Play-Doh and all that. We'd have a station with more traditional type of learning. We'd have a whole bunch of books out on the table about that area. We would have worksheets, and we would have drawing supplies and materials. And I had a little girl that loved academic learning. And she would put together a poster board about the country that we studied with the flag and the type of government that they have there and the type of economy and the religion and just kind of a more traditional, like a social studies project type of approach. And she loved to do that for every country that we studied. So then we'd all come back together as a group and we would tour the classroom together. So the kids who built with blocks could say, this is what we built. This is the building. Here's a picture of the building online. Here's 5 interesting facts about the architecture in this area. And then we could go to the tour the Play-Doh and they'd have the table all set up and they would say, here are the different dishes that we created. Here's some information about those. And then we would go to the worksheet book area and kids would show drawings that they had made inspired by the country we were studying. Some kids got into the fashion. That was really fun. Some of the little girls loved to do the fashion from the different areas. So then we'd Google like traditional clothing from China and modern fashion from China and compare those. I had a lot of kids who made like pictures or collages with fashion. Sometimes we had a station with music and we would look up different music from the different areas. And so at the end, every kid got to share what they created that they were passionate about and what their connection to that country or that culture, what interested them. And then they all got to hear about it. So by the time we were done, they got to hear about architecture. They got to hear about food. They got to hear about traditional historical information and factual geographical information. They got to hear potentially about political information. They got to hear about fashion. They got to hear about art. We did a lot with art. So, that's one way that I try to implement options for choice in my classroom where the kids get to follow. They're all learning about the same topic, but they're getting to follow their own interests in order to get there.
That's awesome. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that I did not hear you say during that I want to point out, right? Because you did not like assign people to go home and make their parents buy the ingredients to make the food actual out of real food and then bring it. And then the kid doesn't communicate to the parents that they need to do that. And it's like, well, I got to have it for tomorrow. And so you're making a, 10 p.m. run to Walmart or whatever. And those kind of things, like I have stories about stuff like that. My wife has stories about, projects like that. And it's like, your parent may not necessarily have time to do this. And it like creates all this chaos and all this madness at home.
I don't do homework in my program. There are a number of reasons for that, but yeah, I don't do homework. For one thing, it's too hard on the families. And for the other thing, it's too hard on me. I don't want to be managing people when they're not there.
Right. And then you have to grade it or somebody has to grade it, right? And engage with the incorrect answers or whatever. Even if you're implementing homework well, it's still a huge amount of extra time. And, this is why you mentioned you were an avid reader, and all that. And I was too when I was really young. And then when I was in like the 3rd grade or so, maybe the 4th grade, we had to check in every single class day with what we had read. Like we had to read at least 10 pages every night. And it was a grade. And I hated that so much. I don't like to be told what to do. And, it's like, I would just be like, I didn't read anything. I like reading, but I don't like to, so it made me stop. And I didn't like really read for fun. I barely read what was assigned. Like I could, skim and I could do things just to pass their tests and stuff. I had a very like conflicted relationship, with school. Right. But after I quit college, I'm a college dropout and I'm happy about that. But after I did that, a couple of years later or so, I started to read again and I started to listen to audiobooks again. And man, I just was making up for lost time. I've consumed a whole lot of material in a very short space of time. But if they had just not made me like hate reading, I could have gotten a lot further,
It's really interesting you say that because my mother is not a teacher. My mother supported my reading. She let me read anything I wanted. She never had any restrictions on it. And I remember when I was teaching early childhood education, one of the things that we were taught to do was to show kids very explicitly, like every time you pull up a book, you're going to say, now the title of this book is, and read the title. Now the author of this book is, now here's the cover page. And you kind of want to get reinforce these concepts of like what a book is and how books work. And I didn't think much of it when they taught me that. It only takes like 30 seconds at the beginning of the book. So I was like, okay, that's fine. It was something that sort of, I didn't think about too much. And my mother saw me do it. In a group of children somewhere. She must have been with me when I was volunteering or something. And later she said, why do you do this? Why do you, go through this sort of rote thing about what books are every time? And I said, oh, I don't know. They taught us to do that. And my mom said, that is so boring. And I burst out laughing because my mom's not a teacher, but I was like, she's got a point. That is really kind of boring. And I was just doing it automatically with every single book. But that's the kind of thing that we do in school is we take things that are inherently enjoyable and we commodify them until they're boring. And I thought, I don't want to do that anymore.
That's a really funny story. And it's just, it depends. It depends on what it is. I used to read mostly fiction and like I still read fiction, but I read a lot of nonfiction now, right? And I wrote a nonfiction book, and I used to write short stories, like creative short stories during school when I was bored out of my mind. I had a similar experience to you. So like world history and stuff, like I could do the worksheet for the day in 5 minutes. And then I was like, what am I going to do with my time? And so I would just rip out a sheet of notebook paper and start writing something, and I would get friends of mine to laugh and stuff. So that was fun. It was fun for me. But I thought, I'm going to write a novel someday. And here I am. I don't even have a novel in progress, right? I have a nonfiction book that I'm happy with. But anyway, so I'm just rambling at this point, Katy. But your programs that you have started, all your experience that you've had doing all this stuff, how has that been going, I guess, in a broad sense? Are you growing? Are you still expanding? Are you, bringing on more people? Or do you serve a specific geographic area, or are you just, okay.
Yes, we are a local program for homeschoolers. And I guess in general, there's a political transformation that's happened. I wouldn't say as a result of, but alongside. So when I worked in public education, I was a liberal. I was kind of a regular liberal. I wasn't real into politics, didn't pay a ton of attention, but I'd been raised in a liberal household in a region where that was common. And so that was the background that I came from. And one thing that was interesting is when I wanted to stay home with my kids, I looked into what would I need to do to start babysitting people's kids? And so I went online and I started doing some research, and I discovered that in my state, if you babysit 2 or fewer kids plus your own, that's unregulated. I wouldn't have to follow any governmental regulations. If I wanted to take more than that, I would have to open what's called a family home daycare, which is very highly regulated by the government. You've got to have people come and do they need to walk through your house. They need to see how far your changing table is from your sink. They have a whole bunch of rules and regulations you've got to do. So right away, I was like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to do the 2 kids or less. And then what led me to opening a nursery school was that I discovered that nursery schools were also unregulated by the government. And so I could run a program that was less than 3 hours a day, and I wouldn't have to do a whole bunch of paperwork. So I was still kind of on the liberal side, but it was funny to me. I was aware of it at the time, like, liberals tend to support governmental interventions in order to improve society. And even though, I consider myself to be on that side of the fence with a lot of things, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing that. I'm going to do what allows me to open a business quickly and get it off the ground and do it the way that I want to. And if you have to fill out a whole bunch of extra paperwork and spend a ton of time doing stuff that I hate doing when already it's not really that lucrative, I'm already like, it's kind of an uphill battle to make enough money in the field of childcare. I'm not doing it. So I'm going to do it the way that's unregulated. It's going to be faster and more practical. It wasn't a political decision. It was a practical decision. And then as I observed my nursery school and realized how much freedom I had to implement things that the kids like to do, and I didn't have to follow rules and regulations. I didn't have to go and ask boards. I didn't have to put together presentations and beg for permission to do what I wanted to do. I literally just had to do it. That was a big shifting point for me. And so meanwhile, I was also becoming, probably like most of the country, more and more disillusioned with politics as a solution. And so there came to be a certain point where I learned about, I was familiar with the term anarchy, but like most people, I kind of thought that it was like chaos. And I remember I posted something on Facebook at one point feeling such a sense of despair about the war economy in particular, and saying, like, at this point, maybe I would just prefer anarchy. And then a couple people commented on my thing and said, actually, you're not far off there. Anarchy is not, I think you mean chaos, and you're saying you take your chances with chaos, which is what I was saying. But anarchy has some philosophy behind it. It's got some ideas behind it. It doesn't just mean that. And so I started to look at that a little bit, and I hit a point where it became really simple. I'm not an avid theorist in terms of voluntarism or anarchy, but there came a point where I thought, I can't see any justification for giving the state a monopoly on violence, force, and coercion. If violence is wrong, force is wrong, coercion is wrong, then there is no element called the state or whatever you want to call it that can make those things ethical. And at that point, it just became a very easy shift where I didn't really need to know anything else to know that these things were unethical. It would be like if you were back in the days of slavery and you recognized that slavery was unethical, and then people are saying, well, how are we going to run the plantations? Well, that's not the question. The question is it ethical is this an ethical way to approach life? And if the answer is no, then you have to solve those other problems, but doesn't mean you have them already solved. It just means that you're recognizing that implementing an unethical solution is not the right way to go about it. So that shift from being generally liberal, not real political, shifted over to where I recognized that violence, force, and coercion are wrong. And I already had implemented that, like in my classrooms and with the kids. I've never hit kids. I've never screamed at kids. I've never, I never had those sort of punitive, top-down, really highly controlling approaches anyway. So this was sort of a bigger version of thinking about how the world works and what do I want to bring into the world? How do I want to move through the world? What do I want to embody in this world that is going to reflect my values? And so when I opened my second business, this was post-COVID and everything was shut down. And so for homeschoolers, people think that homeschoolers stay at home a lot, but we don't. We take our kids to a whole bunch of stuff out in the community, and we're very reliant on these networks and these things in the community because most kids don't want to be at home alone all the time. They want to be interacting with other human beings and doing things. And so there was nothing to do. And there were a group of us that we decided to put together a little like homeschool co-op in someone's basement. And so we did that for a year. And then the family that had let us use their basement decided to move out of state. And they said, sorry, you can't use our basement next year. We're going to be putting the house on the market. We're leaving. And so at that point, we began looking for a place to rent. And we found a church that was willing to rent us space, but they said, you've got to have an insurance policy in order to rent space here. You've got to have some sort of liability insurance. So then we start calling around and we found somebody that was going to sell us liability insurance that we could afford, but they said, you have to be something. You can't just be a group of moms that's running a homeschool co-op. You've got to be either a non-for-profit or you've got to be a DBA, a sole proprietorship. You've got to be something, an entity, in order to get this insurance. And so because I had my previous experience of running my legally exempt childcare and my nursery school, both of which were exempt from governmental regulations, I said to the other moms I was working with, I'm going to go back to the drawing board here and I'm going to find out if there's a way that we can open this business where we will be legally exempt from governmental regulations. And if I can find something, I'll put the business in my name and I'll open it as a DBA because I have experience. I've done that. If, however, it's going to be a bazillion pounds of paperwork, I'm not doing it. So let me see what I can find out. So then I went back to the drawing board. I met with a couple, we have like a local agency that deals with childcare. And so they can help you parse those regulations. So I went and did some research myself. I went and met with the agency a couple times. They had helped me with my first business. And I discovered that there are a handful of categories with older children that are unregulated in New York State. And one of them is classes, like academic classes. So I said, okay, we can open this and for academic classes. And that's how we're going to structure it so that we are safely in the realm of being unregulated by the state. And so the whole process of becoming an entrepreneur has happened simultaneous with moving from being a person who generally, I was very disillusioned by the system, but I didn't ever have the experience of thinking outside of it. Or, believing that there was another option outside. I just was unaware of that. And so that awakening has happened alongside. And, as you work with toddlers are very, very willful. And I got middle schoolers now. Middle schools are very, very willful. So the questions every single day of how do you implement what you believe and still maintain an environment that's not chaotic, an environment that's safe? How do you work with children in a way that's respectful of their humanity and their choices and give them options and give them freedom and still ensure that they're going to be safe and that the environment is going to be safe? So there's been lots of opportunities for my own personal growth in terms of my ethics and my values and my beliefs to expand and to grow deeper and to grow roots as I go. And the program itself right now is 2 days a week. I consider expanding it sometimes, but I would probably want to expand it with younger kids because that's where my heart is. I like working with younger kids. And my son, who is still homeschooling, is currently in the 5th grade. And I anticipate that he will homeschool through 8th grade. We have in Syracuse, they have something called Say Yes to Education. And so if you attend public school for high school, it was created by a woman who was the cantor at Syracuse University, and it is a conglomeration of private colleges and universities all around the country that have agreed to give free college tuition to Syracuse City School District graduates if they maintain the grades to be accepted to the college or the university. And it's because we have so much generational poverty in the area, and they're really trying to allow kids who are willing to work hard to have access to these private university educations so that they can escape from poverty. And so, but it's open to anybody in the district. So I kind of hoped that my kids would want to do public school for high school so they could take advantage of that program. And also because I'm not a high school person, I was like, you guys are homeschooling for high school, you got to do the paperwork because I'm about done. So my oldest son started public school in 9th grade. He's in 11th grade now. He's doing great. And my middle daughter, she is in 8th grade right now, and she opted to go to public school for 8th grade because they're opening a new high school in Syracuse, and it's going to have a lot of really cool programs that she's into, but you have to be in the district and get a referral to start at this brand new high school next year. So she went to public school for 8th grade so she could get that referral and hopefully be able to go to this new school next year. And I'm anticipating my youngest will stay with me until high school, probably stay homeschooling until high school. And at that point, I might expand my business because we only meet 2 days a week. So I could do 2 days a week for the middle and high school, and then I could do 2 days a week where I did an elementary, which would be a lot of fun for me. But I'll probably wait until then because I've already bitten off enough for now.
Don't need to get too ambitious, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, because you don't want to be burned out. I mean, sometimes we have to say, well, it's a homeschool vacation because we have too much going on, right? So like I told you
Yes. And I like those days. My son and I are at the program Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that gives us Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where we get to do a ton of fun stuff. We go to science museums. We take little mini road trips around the area. We go swimming. We go to the zoo. We just do stuff that he wants to do, which is really fun. I don't want to give that up yet.
That's very important. I mean, it really is, to do those things because I mean, heck, all we ever did was go to school, like, and for years, right? That was my whole life was go to school and then dread going back to school. That's all I did. So, I mean, this is awesome. I appreciate you walking me through some of the things that you've been working on. We could sit here and talk about, political theory and all these interesting things, probably all day, and that would be really fun. But I know that's not, kind of the core of the episode. But I do have a similar story there just to, add my 2 cents or whatever. I started out as a liberal. I mean, I voted for Obama in 2008, right? It's my first election. And I've changed a whole lot since then. I just say that. And part of it was reading all those books, So it's interesting how these things happen. Maybe I'll just leave it at that. But do you have, I feel like we talked about this on our pre-show, but do you have any particular like newsletters, social media accounts, anything that you like want people to follow? Do you have any call to action that you'd like for people to keep up with your, programs or businesses or not really?
So far, I do not. So the two other mothers and I that we started the program, none of us are particularly technologically advanced. I had made my own website for my first business. I think it's still up, the Little Strathmore Schoolhouse. I don't think I ever took that website down. But I tried to make a website for the second business, and I made like a prototype, and then we kept going back and forth about what we want to put on there, and then finally I just said, I don't have the time to put any more towards this, and I don't have the level of expertise to do the things that we desire to do. So we took it down, and it's been that's been real interesting to me because my nursery school, I marketed completely online. Facebook was pretty new back then. I had the parents sign releases if it was okay to put their kids online or not, like the photos. And I had a lot of options. They could say yes, or they could say only the back of the head, or they could say no. And I would honor that. But I took photos of the kids, and then I had captions about what we were doing. And I had a Facebook page, and I put the photos up there. Sometimes I still look back just to get nostalgia about how cute it was. And then my neighborhood actually has a Facebook page. So I shared my business page to my neighborhood page as a form of marketing. It was really highly social media based. And it was new, especially new to me. And it was really successful. And so I kind of anticipated doing the same thing this time around, but because there were several of us trying to figure out what do we want to have on this website? What do we want to have on this Facebook page? Blah, 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 blah. And people had gotten a lot more privacy concerned in that time. So whereas parents didn't really balk at me wanting to share pictures of the kids learning when I first did it with my nursery school, I knew that by the time the second business came around, we weren't on that same page anymore. Parents didn't feel the same way about sharing photos of their kids on social media. So we ended up, not really by conscious choice, but just sort of by a series of events, having no web presence whatsoever. We have no website. We have nothing at all. Occasionally we make flyers on Canva and then we share them in the local homeschooling groups on Facebook, and people reach out to me that way. But we have no web presence, and almost all of our marketing has happened through word of mouth, which has been a really fun and interesting thing to have happen. And we only accept cash and checks. We don't do any online banking. So it's been this sort of delve into the past where I run a small business, and it's very community based, and it's word of mouth, and it's cash and checks only. And so that's been a funny thing to see happen, is that as the world got more technologically advanced, we kind of ended up going the other direction. And thus far, it's worked out great for us. We haven't had any problem with clients. We tend to have a waiting list. And so we're kind of like, we're not going to mess with a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, there's certainly advantages to not going the full, kind of enterprise route with every little thing. You don't have to have a Facebook and an X and a TikTok and a Twitter. I mean, I just said, and a YouTube and, every single thing. Because there's always more popping up every day, it seems like, too. I just heard about a platform called Blue Sky yesterday. I was like, what's that? And it looks just like Twitter or X. But I don't even know if it's any good. Don't worry about that. But it's just, it's a lot to keep up with, and that keeps you from doing your primary purpose, which is educating kids, right? So I absolutely understand that. So given that you don't have like a resource page or anything like that I can direct people to, do you have maybe a couple of words of advice for somebody who isn't in your, little slice of the United States that is like, I don't know how to get started with homeschooling. I don't know what I'm going to do to, find a support network. Do you get this kind of question all the time?
I do get this question a lot. And in fact, I'm hoping in a couple years to perhaps put together a guidebook for parents with that. It's going to depend highly on your state laws. Like New York is going to be one of the more highly regulated states. We're always one of the more highly regulated states. So probably people in other places will have more options and more freedom than I did. But I would recommend making connections with other people in your community and also looking for people who are educators, because I'm a strong believer that any parent who desires to do so can be a successful homeschooler. But being a successful teacher to your own children is significantly different from being a successful teacher to a large group of children. And a lot of times homeschooling parents may be wonderful teachers to their own children and have absolutely no desire to teach a class of a bunch of kids. So I found a lot of luck with Facebook there. I joined when my oldest child was 4. So I sent my oldest child to preschool for a month when he was 3. And that was what I had anticipated doing. I always thought I would do it. And I signed him up. He was curious. He mentioned wanting to go to preschool. So I signed him up for preschool. And he went for 1 month. And at the time, it was when I was babysitting those 2 kids. So I had 2 kids right around his age, and I had his little sister at home. And partway through the first month, he said, okay, I've had enough of that. That was okay to go there, but I'm done. I'm not going to go back. And I said, well, what do you mean you're not going to go back? And he said, well, Mommy, everything that they do there, you do it here. We have the same toys. We have the same books. We have the same stuff. Why do I have to go there to do stuff that I could just do at home? And I was like, that's actually a very good point. I guess you don't have to go back. So right when he was about 4 is when I decided, around that 3 and 4 age is when I said, I think I may homeschool my kids. And I looked for homeschooling groups on Facebook, and that was really easy and successful way to meet a ton of other homeschoolers. We started to go to, there are park play dates, there are picnics, there are field trips to various things. So we just started attending things, and that was how I found a network of homeschoolers. And then that network of homeschoolers being in those groups and listening to parents is what made me know that there was a market for classes where the kids could be dropped off and get some educational benefits and the benefits of being around other kids, and also where most homeschool co-ops, the parents they have to teach. And I met a lot of teachers I met a lot of parents by participating in those who didn't want to teach. They didn't like it. And I understood, because there are jobs that people, I would never in a million years want to be a nurse. Like, under no circumstances. I don't like blood. I don't like guts. I don't like scary stuff, nothing. And I don't like panicking in emergency situations. Like, I'm not cut out for it. So if somebody says I don't like teaching, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think we have different strengths, and I can see that's just not what everybody wants to do. So I knew there'd be a market for this, especially as you get into the middle school and high school age, where it becomes harder for kids to access that sense of community. So that network of being involved with Facebook groups online, I would highly recommend to anybody who's curious about homeschooling to go on Facebook and start searching for local groups of homeschooling parents, because you'll find people, and you'll find people from every stripe. If you want your kids in a program that is 100% Christian and church-based, and the curriculum is church-based, you can find it. If you want a secular program, you can find it. If you want a program for people who think that kids should spend all day outside, you can find it. If you want a program for people who use Minecraft as their primary, curriculum tool, you can find it. And you can connect with homeschoolers all over the world. And because we have online learning, you could start a business with people that aren't even in your area. If you click with them and you trust them and you feel like you have a vibe where you can make that work, I mean, the possibilities are really endless at this point in time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you. There's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't think of myself, so I really appreciate that. Lots of good resources. Um, Now we're coming to a close. We've been, going for a little while here. I want to respect your time, and all the time you've set aside here for the show already. But I always like to just wrap up by asking you if there's anything I didn't ask that you would like to talk about.
One thing that I have observed with my own children, and then I had a fellow homeschooling mom tell me this. So my kids both started school, one in ninth grade and one in eighth grade. And my eighth grader recently was talking about how she doesn't understand why some kids have a hard time doing their work at school. My daughter is one of those kids who used to do workbooks for fun. She would make me take her to the store and buy workbooks for fun. She loves what I consider kind of busy work. She's very enthusiastic and willing to try anything. It makes her an avid learner. So she came home and she was like, why will these kids not do their work? Why are the teachers, struggling with kids who don't want to do their work and don't want to hand it in? And my son, who's now in 11th grade, said to her, oh, you're realizing what I realized when I first started school, which is that it's not nearly as hard as people make it sound, and it's not that difficult to do the work. Why don't these kids want to do it? And I said, well, I think it has to do with their earlier experiences of doing the work, where they've been forced to do stuff that's not relevant to them and it's not interesting to them for so long that this is just more of the same, and they don't have the same level of patience and enthusiasm that you guys can bring to it because you haven't been like beaten down by the system, kind of. And there's a fellow homeschooling mom she's got 6 kids. Her oldest two maybe are already in college, and her youngest is like 8. So she's really run the gamut of homeschooling. She's seen her kids all the way through. And she said that one thing that she's observed is that as elementary school and preschool has become less and less developmentally appropriate, kids are hating school at a younger age, and they're refusing to engage with the work at a younger age. And she said that what she has observed is that if kids stay home and homeschool just through elementary school, they retain their sense of curiosity and they retain their sense of eagerness to learn, so that when they do start school in 8th grade or 9th grade or at the college level, they find it difficult to understand why people don't want to do the work or can't meet the demands, because they still have that sense of curiosity and wonder and interest intact that allows them to be successful in college settings or in high school settings, where other kids who had those qualities sort of beaten out of them by years of doing developmentally inappropriate work have lost it. And so I thought that was really interesting, because my son was unschooled, and he only took standardized tests when he was required to by the state, which I think happened once while I homeschooled him, because it only has to happen once every other year between 4th and 8th grade. And then they canceled it a couple of years because of COVID. So we didn't have to do it those years. So he had only taken one standardized test in his life when he started high school. And he got the highest grade on the Regents exam for both math and science of anybody in his class. And people were really surprised to hear that he was unschooled, that we didn't do sit-down learning, because he just knocks it out of the park. But I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he knows why he's there. He has a goal. He wants to get into Syracuse University, and he wants to go to college there. And he knows what it requires of him, and he can delay gratification. My kids can delay gratification really well when they have a goal. They aren't, I don't have to wake them up in the morning. I don't have to fight with them to get up and get ready for things. If they know they want to do something, they get up and get ready. That's something that belongs to them. So I think that as we give kids more choice and more power when they're younger, what I'm observing is a greater sense of self-ownership and responsibility when they get older, and a greater ability to decide if they want to enter into a system and excel at that system and use that system for the benefits that they desire to acquire from it, or if they desire to go their own way and do their own thing. And they have my support either way. But that is one thing that has been really interesting to see, is that you hear a lot about, like, if you homeschool them, if you unschool them, they'll never be able to succeed in society. They'll never be able to delay gratification and blah, blah, blah. And I'm seeing the opposite. I'm seeing a greater sense of self-ownership, a greater sense of responsibility, and the ability to decide if and when the systems serve them and what they want to get out of it, to determine if they want to participate or not, because they have that choice.
Yeah. And, at the same time, like, and I completely agree with you. Absolutely 100% completely agree with all that. At the same time, you have people pushing for like pre-K, like shoving education even earlier into kids' lives. And it's like, is that intentional? I don't know, not going to get into all that. Of course, we're wrapping up the show, but it's food for thought for anyone watching. I think it's very, very interesting topic to look into. And since this is the first education episode that I think we've done on the show, I will just plug, for anyone who hasn't read it that is watching the show, Murray Rothbard's book, Education Free and Compulsory, is wonderful. It's like 60 pages. It's barely a book. It's wonderful, wonderful. I've given that book, I've printed out copies and handed it to people to get them to like think about education a little differently. And it's always received well anytime anyone actually reads it. So that's a little personal nugget. But Katy, I really appreciate all your time. This has been a wonderful episode. I love hearing about all the cool things that you're doing, and obviously we'll continue to do. Is there anything that I forgot?
I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and maybe we'll have you back as you have other things developing in the future.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here.
Thanks, Katy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to The Price of Time, hosted by Luke Tatum. Subscribe to us for more episodes. Check the description box below to learn more about our guest. And if you found this episode valuable, please share it with a friend.